When we make the decision to put God first in our lives, it establishes a strong foundation for our sense of purpose and direction. Life can often feel chaotic and uncertain, especially when we're faced with difficult decisions or unexpected challenges. But when we prioritize our relationship with God, we're anchored in something much greater than ourselves, something that transcends the temporary circumstances around us. By turning to Him for guidance, we open ourselves to a path that is filled with meaning and clarity, which brings stability amidst the unpredictability of life. God's presence in our lives is not just a source of comfort during hard times, it also serves as the compass that helps us navigate the more mundane, everyday moments. It's easy to get lost in the busyness of our routines and forget the larger purpose for which we were created. But when we consciously choose to put God first, everything we do takes on a deeper significance. We begin to see that even the small tasks, whether it's our work, our relationships, or our personal growth, are opportunities to serve God and align with His plan. This alignment with God provides a clear sense of direction. It's not that our lives become entirely free of confusion or doubt. Rather, it means we have a reliable source to turn to for clarity when we do feel uncertain. With God leading the way, we can trust that the path we're walking is one that leads toward fulfillment. As we seek His guidance through prayer, reflection, and study of His Word, He reveals to us the next steps, helping us make choices that honor His will for us. Whether it's a big life decision like changing careers or moving to a new city, or a smaller everyday choice, His wisdom can guide us toward what is truly best for us. Moreover, putting God first allows us to tap into a sense of peace that comes from knowing we are not alone in the decisions we make. In a world that constantly pressures us to rely on our own abilities, resources, and understanding, there is immense freedom in surrendering control to God. It frees us from the weight of needing to have all the answers and assures us that, no matter what, He is with us. When we make Him the priority, we aren't carrying the burden of life alone. We have the Creator of the universe on our side, and He is actively involved in our journey. It also means we start viewing challenges through a different lens. When difficulties arise, as they inevitably will, we no longer see them as obstacles that we must overcome on our own. Instead, we see them as opportunities to lean on God's strength, to grow in faith, and to deepen our understanding of His plan for our lives. This perspective shift doesn't make hardships disappear, but it gives them purpose. Each struggle, no matter how small, can serve as a lesson in trust, resilience, and dependence on God. In a world that often tries to pull us in many directions, putting God first becomes an act of resistance. It is a deliberate choice to prioritize the eternal over the fleeting, the divine over the temporary. When we make God the foundation of our lives, everything else falls into place. Our values become rooted in something that is unchanging, allowing us to withstand life's storms. It's like building a house on a solid rock rather than shifting sand. Everything else in life can be unpredictable. But when we put God at the center, we build our lives on a foundation that cannot be shaken. Furthermore, as we commit to putting God first, we also begin to understand the fullness of what He offers us. The clarity and direction we receive aren't just about where we go, but also about who we become along the way. By seeking His guidance, we find purpose not only in the tasks we perform, but also in the way we relate to others, the way we handle adversity, and the way we grow spiritually. Our relationship with God becomes the source of our strength and our sense of direction, not just for the practical aspects of life, but for our spiritual journey as well. Ultimately, putting God first brings us closer to the person He created us to be. It frees us from the distractions of the world and helps us focus on the things that truly matter: our relationship with Him, our loved ones, and our growth as individuals. When we commit to living with God at the center, every aspect of our lives gains clarity and we begin to see the bigger picture, knowing that our journey is part of something far greater than ourselves. And with God leading the way, we can move forward in confidence, knowing we are walking the path meant for us, filled with purpose and meaning. Life is filled with moments of hardship, uncertainty, and struggle. These are the times that test our strength, resilience, and faith. However, when we put God first, we are given a source of strength that transcends anything we can find on our own. Trusting in God's plan during difficult moments doesn't mean that the struggles will disappear, but it does provide us with a deep sense of peace and assurance that we are not facing them alone. By relying on God, we gain the strength to endure, the wisdom to navigate through the storm, and the comfort that He is walking with us every step of the way. When we face challenges, it can be easy to become overwhelmed by the weight of our circumstances. The temptation is to focus on the problems, to obsess over the what ifs and the potential negative outcomes. But putting God first means that in the midst of our struggles, we shift our focus to Him. We acknowledge that He is bigger than our problems, that His power is greater than any obstacle we may encounter. This shift in perspective is a powerful tool for overcoming hardship. It's not about denying the reality of the situation, but about remembering that God is in control and He has the ability to turn even the most difficult circumstances into opportunities for growth and healing. One of the greatest gifts of putting God first is that it allows us to trust in His timing. We often want things to happen on our own schedule, especially when we are in pain or facing difficulty. We pray for a quick solution, for the burden to be lifted immediately, but God's timing is perfect even when we don't understand it. Trusting in God during difficult times means surrendering our own timelines and trusting that He knows what is best for us. He sees the bigger picture. And what may seem like a setback or a trial is often a stepping stone toward a greater purpose that we cannot yet comprehend. His faithfulness is evident when we look back on our lives and see how He has carried us through every season, even the most challenging ones. Furthermore, putting God first in times of difficulty helps us to grow in patience and endurance. We live in a world that values instant gratification, and it can be tempting to want our problems solved as quickly as possible. However, through hardship, God is often teaching us valuable lessons that we can only learn through time and perseverance. It's during these moments that our character is shaped, our faith deepens, and we become more reliant on God's strength rather than our own. Each trial becomes an opportunity to grow stronger in our relationship with God as we learn to trust Him more fully and completely. In addition to the personal strength we gain through putting God first in our struggles, we also experience a peace that surpasses understanding. This peace isn't about the absence of difficulty, but rather the assurance that God is present with us no matter the circumstances. When we turn to God in prayer, when we meditate on His word, and when we lean into His promises, we are reminded that we do not face our struggles alone. God's presence brings a peace that the world cannot offer, a calm in the storm that provides comfort and reassurance. It is this peace that allows us to endure trials with hope, to trust that God is working all things together for our good, even when we can't see it in the moment. Moreover, trusting God in difficult times also teaches us the importance of humility. It's easy to rely on our own abilities when things are going well, but when we are faced with hardship, we are reminded of our need for God. It's in our moments of weakness that we experience His strength most profoundly. By putting God first during tough times, we acknowledge that we cannot do it all on our own. We need His help, His guidance, and His provision. And when we rely on Him, we are reminded that His power is made perfect in our weakness, and His grace is sufficient for all our needs. Finally, putting God first in difficulty helps us to see our trials through a lens of hope. Rather than focusing on the despair of the moment, we remember that our struggles are temporary and that God has promised to bring good out of even the hardest situations. It's not that we dismiss the pain or pretend it doesn't matter. Rather, we choose to believe that God has a purpose for everything and that He will bring us through to the other side stronger, wiser, and more deeply rooted in Him. In the end, putting God first in difficult times isn't just about surviving our challenges. It's about thriving through them. It's about allowing God to shape us, refine us, and use us for His glory, even in the midst of hardship. It's about finding strength in Him, learning to trust His timing, experiencing His peace, and growing in endurance and character. And when we do, we can face any trial with the confidence that God is with us, He is for us, and He will see us through to the other side. Putting God first doesn't only shape our personal relationship with Him, it profoundly influences the relationships we have with others as well. Our connection with God serves as a foundation for how we interact with those around us, whether it's family, friends, coworkers, or even strangers. When we prioritize God, His love and grace become the model for how we are called to love and treat others. By centering our lives on Him, we are better equipped to build deeper, more meaningful relationships rooted in compassion, understanding, and selflessness. When we put God first, we begin to see people through His eyes. We recognize that every person is created in His image and that we are all worthy of His love. This perspective shifts our attitudes, helping us to approach relationships not from a place of judgment or pride, but from a place of humility and respect. We are reminded that God's love for us is unconditional, and in turn, we are called to extend that same love to others, even when it's difficult or when we feel they don't deserve it. Putting God first helps us develop the ability to love unconditionally, offering grace to those who hurt us, forgiveness to those who wrong us, and kindness to those who need it most. Additionally, putting God first encourages us to serve others selflessly. Jesus' life was the ultimate example of service, as He came to earth not to be served, but to serve others. When we follow Christ's example, we shift our focus from our own desires and needs to the well-being of those around us. Service becomes an expression of our love for God and for others, a way to reflect His goodness in the world. Serving others doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as offering a listening ear, helping someone in need, or speaking words of encouragement. By putting God at the center of our lives, we recognize that our time, resources, and energy are meant to be used for His glory, which often means using them to bless and uplift those around us. Furthermore, when we put God first, we cultivate a spirit of forgiveness in our relationships. It's easy to hold grudges or harbor bitterness when we feel wrong, but God calls us to forgive as He has forgiven us. His forgiveness is boundless, and He invites us to extend that same grace to others. Putting God first means choosing to let go of resentment and choosing peace instead. It means giving up the right to hold on to hurt and allowing God to heal our wounds. This act of forgiveness doesn't just benefit the other person, it also frees us from the weight of anger and resentment, allowing us to move forward in our relationships with a clean heart. By prioritizing God, we become vessels of His grace, offering forgiveness even when it feels impossible, knowing that He has forgiven us far greater debts. In relationships, putting God first also teaches us the importance of communication, humility, and patience. We begin to understand that we are not perfect, and neither are the people around us. We learn to approach conflict with a spirit of reconciliation, seeking to understand before being understood. We learn to listen, to offer grace in moments of tension, and to seek peace instead of division. In a world where pride and selfishness often drive conflict, putting God first brings about an attitude of humility that opens the door for healing and understanding. It helps us to seek reconciliation rather than revenge, unity rather than division. When we put God first in our relationships, we also invite His presence into those relationships. His wisdom and guidance become a steady force in how we navigate our interactions with others. Whether it's as a parent, spouse, friend, or colleague, seeking God's direction in our relationships allows us to approach them with love, wisdom, and patience. We begin to see our relationships not just as personal connections, but as opportunities to reflect God's character to the world. When we prioritize God, we become conduits of His love, and our relationships become a reflection of His goodness, a witness to His transformative power. It's also important to note that putting God first in our relationships doesn't always mean that those relationships will be easy. There will be times when misunderstandings, disagreements, and conflict arise, even among people who share the same faith. But when we are committed to putting God at the center, we gain the perspective and the tools needed to navigate these challenges with grace. We are reminded that love doesn't always look like agreement, but it does look like respect, kindness, and the willingness to work through difficulties with patience and understanding. By putting God first, we can cultivate a deeper sense of empathy and compassion for those around us. We become more attuned to the needs of others, more willing to listen, and more eager to help. God's love fills us so fully that it overflows into our relationships, transforming them from ordinary connections into extraordinary opportunities for growth, healing, and connection. Ultimately, putting God first in our relationships helps us create a community of love, trust, and mutual support. It binds us together in ways that go beyond the surface level, fostering an environment where people feel seen, heard, and valued. As we prioritize God and His love, we build relationships that reflect His heart for humanity, relationships that are not built on self-interest or convenience, but on a deep, sacrificial love that mirrors the love Christ has for us. And in putting God first in our lives does more than just shape our purpose, it also plays a significant role in our personal growth and transformation. When we choose to prioritize God, we are making a commitment to be continually shaped by His guidance, His wisdom, and His love. This commitment transforms us, not just in our actions, but in our very hearts and minds. Over time, we become more aligned with who God created us to be, growing in ways that reflect His character. One of the most powerful aspects of putting God first is that it opens the door for spiritual growth. As we seek God daily through prayer, scripture, and reflection, He molds us into the people we are meant to become. This growth isn't always immediate or easy, but it's steady and consistent. Just as a plant grows over time with the right care, so too does our faith and character as we invest time in cultivating our relationship with God. The more we seek Him, the more He shapes our hearts to reflect His values, patience, kindness, humility, and love. In the process of putting God first, we also begin to experience transformation in our attitudes and desires. Before prioritizing God, we might have been driven by our own ambitions, desires for approval, or fleeting pleasures. However, when we make God the center of our lives, our motivations shift. We no longer seek fulfillment in worldly achievements or temporary success, but in living according to God's will. Our values become rooted in His eternal truths rather than the shifting standards of society. We start to desire what God desires, placing a higher value on the things that matter most: love, faithfulness, service, and obedience to His commands. Moreover, putting God first leads to transformation in how we view ourselves. Our identity is no longer tied to what we accomplish or how others perceive us. Instead, we understand that our worth comes from being beloved children of God. This deep sense of identity brings freedom from the pressures of comparison or the need to prove ourselves. We begin to recognize that we don't need to strive for perfection or seek validation from others because we are already enough in God's eyes. His love and grace provide us with the security to embrace who we are, flaws and all, and to grow in His image. This personal transformation also manifests in our relationships. As God works in our hearts, we become more patient, forgiving, and understanding. The more we learn to love and rely on God, the better equipped we are to love and serve those around us. It's through His strength and wisdom that we learn how to deal with conflict in healthy ways, how to offer forgiveness when it's difficult, and how to show compassion to others even when they don't always deserve it. The more we put God first, the more our relationships reflect His love, because we are becoming more like Him. In addition, putting God first transforms our ability to handle adversity. Life is full of challenges, personal struggles, disappointments, and setbacks. But when God is at the center, we face these difficulties with a different perspective. We stop viewing hardship as something that defines us and start seeing it as an opportunity for growth. Through every trial, God teaches us to rely more on Him, to trust His wisdom, and to lean on His strength. This mindset shift is transformative because it allows us to endure hardship with hope, knowing that every challenge is part of God's greater plan for our lives. Rather than becoming discouraged or bitter, we grow stronger and more resilient, developing a deeper trust in God's goodness. Putting God first also helps us to develop greater spiritual maturity. As we continue to seek Him and prioritize His will, we grow in discernment and wisdom. We begin to make decisions based not on our immediate desires, but on what will honor God and fulfill His purpose for our lives. We become more self-awareness, recognizing areas where we need to change, and more willing to work on those areas, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. This maturity helps us navigate the complexities of life with grace, handling both successes and failures with humility and wisdom. Our church covers winter games to help. Ultimately, the transformation that comes from putting God first is a continual process. It's not something that happens overnight, but it is something that grows steadily as we keep our focus on Him. With each passing day, as we choose to live with God at the center, we are becoming more of the person He created us to be. His love is the driving force behind our transformation, shaping us into people who reflect His character, pursue His purpose, and live in a way that honors Him. By making God the priority in our lives, we are not just changing our external behaviors, we are allowing Him to change us from the inside out. This ongoing process of transformation leads us to live lives that are marked by greater peace, joy, and fulfillment as we become more aligned with His will and more confident in who we are in Him. And in this transformation, we can trust that God is continually at work, helping us to grow into the best version of ourselves, one that reflects His glory and love to the world around us. When we put God first in our lives, we align ourselves with His divine will, and this alignment brings with it a profound sense of peace and purpose. To live in alignment with God's will is to acknowledge that His plans for us are greater than anything we could design for ourselves. It's about recognizing that His understanding surpasses our own and trusting that the path He lays before us is the one that will ultimately lead us to the fulfillment of our highest purpose. The beauty of aligning with God's will is that it provides a steady and unwavering foundation, one that remains secure even in times of uncertainty and change. Living in alignment with God's will requires a heart that is willing to listen and obey. It means surrendering our desires, ambitions, and plans to God's guidance. This surrender is not about losing our freedom or individuality. Rather, it is about understanding that true freedom comes from living in harmony with God's purpose. When we choose to put God first, we begin to see that His plans are always for our good, even when we don't fully understand them. His wisdom surpasses ours, and His timing is perfect, even when we are impatient or eager for immediate results. Through prayer, reflection, and seeking His guidance, we are able to discern His will and walk confidently in the direction He calls us to go. One of the most significant benefits of aligning with God's will is the sense of peace that comes with it. Life can be full of decisions, big and small, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the weight of choosing the right path. But when we prioritize God, we are given a sense of calm assurance that He will guide our steps. We no longer need to worry about whether we are making the right choice, because we know that as long as we are seeking His will, He will lead us where we need to be. This peace is not about the absence of challenges, but about the confidence that God is with us through every trial and that He is working everything together for our good. Aligning with God's will also brings clarity and direction in life. When we are focused on following His plan, we become less distracted by the noise and pressures of the world. The world tells us to pursue fame, wealth, and status, but God calls us to seek a different kind of greatness, one that is rooted in humility, service, and love. When we make God first, we begin to see clearly what truly matters and can pursue those things with passion and purpose. We are less likely to be swayed by the shifting values of culture and more inclined to follow the principles that align with God's eternal truth. Moreover, when we are aligned with God's will, our actions begin to reflect His character. The choices we make, the way we treat others, and the way we handle adversity all become opportunities to honor God. We are no longer living for our own satisfaction, but for the glory of God. This alignment with His will is not just about following a set of rules. It's about cultivating a heart that desires to please Him in all things. It is about seeking to love others as He has loved us and striving to live with integrity, compassion, and kindness. Another benefit of aligning with God's will is the way it transforms our relationships. When we put God first, we are better able to love and serve those around us. Our relationships are no longer motivated by selfish desires or expectations, but by a desire to reflect God's love. We begin to understand that our relationships are not just about us, but are opportunities to be a source of light and encouragement to others. Whether it's with family, friends, or even coworkers, aligning with God's will allows us to approach relationships with humility, patience, and grace, creating stronger and more meaningful connections. At times, aligning with God's will can be challenging, especially when it requires sacrifice or stepping outside of our comfort zones. It may mean letting go of things that we hold dear or making difficult decisions that are not popular or easy. However, the rewards of living in alignment with God far outweigh the temporary discomfort we might feel. When we put God first, we are constantly being shaped into the people He created us to be. And that transformation leads to a life that is marked by peace, purpose, and fulfillment. The challenges we face in aligning with His will are often the very things that refine our character and help us grow into stronger, more compassionate individuals. Ultimately, putting God first and aligning with His will is a path that leads to a life of meaning and fulfillment. It's not about living a perfect life or avoiding difficulty, but about trusting that God knows what is best for us and walking in His guidance. When we choose to align ourselves with His plan, we gain a deeper understanding of who we are and why we are here. We no longer have to strive to create our own path or figure out life on our own. God is with us, leading us toward the future He has designed, a future that is filled with hope, purpose, and His unwavering love. When we choose to put God first in our lives, we begin to experience a deep sense of fulfillment that transcends the temporary pleasures of this world. The pursuit of happiness, success, and personal achievement can often leave us feeling empty, as these things are fleeting and at times hollow. But when God is at the center of our lives, we find a fulfillment that is lasting, one that goes beyond our circumstances, and is rooted in our relationship with Him. This kind of fulfillment comes not from external accomplishments or material possessions, but from living a life aligned with God's purpose. One of the primary sources of this fulfillment is the peace that comes from knowing we are living in accordance with God's will. When we prioritize God above all else, we are no longer chasing after things that don't ultimately satisfy us. Instead, we are focused on what is eternal, and that focus provides a sense of purpose and contentment. No matter what challenges or hardships we face, we can rest in the assurance that God is with us and that His plans for our lives are good. This peace, grounded in His promises, gives us a deep sense of satisfaction that nothing in this world can offer. Putting God first also brings fulfillment by helping us discover and live out our true purpose. So often we search for meaning in our careers, relationships, or personal achievements, believing that one of these things will provide the fulfillment we seek. But when we place God at the center, we begin to see that our true purpose is found in serving Him and others. As we live out God's calling for our lives, we find that our work, our relationships, and our daily actions take on new meaning. We are no longer living for ourselves, but for a greater purpose, one that aligns with God's eternal kingdom. This shift in perspective leads to a life that is not only fulfilling, but also deeply impactful as we become instruments of God's love and grace in the world. In addition, putting God first brings fulfillment through the relationships we build. When we live with God as our priority, we are better able to love others in the way He calls us to. We become more patient, more forgiving, and more compassionate, and these qualities foster deeper, more meaningful connections with those around us. Our relationships are no longer centered on selfish desires or expectations, but on mutual love and respect, rooted in the love of God. These connections provide us with a sense of belonging, community, and they help us grow in ways that contribute to our fulfillment. We are made to live in relationship, and when we allow God to guide how we relate to others, our relationships become a source of strength, joy, and fulfillment. Moreover, fulfillment through putting God first is evident in the spiritual growth that occurs in our lives. As we seek God's guidance and strive to live according to His word, we grow in wisdom, understanding, and character. This spiritual growth helps us become more like Christ and more attuned to His will for our lives. The deeper our relationship with God grows, the more we experience the joy and satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with Him. We begin to realize that true fulfillment isn't found in external achievements or worldly success, but in growing closer to God and living according to His design for our lives. Fulfillment is also experienced through the peace that arises from knowing that God's provision is sufficient. When we put God first, we are reminded that we do not have to worry about tomorrow or strive for more than we need. God promises to provide for us, to take care of our needs, and to be with us in every circumstance. This trust in God's provision brings a sense of security and peace that nothing else can provide. We no longer have to live in fear of what might happen or what we might lack, because we know that God will provide all that we need. This trust in God's faithfulness frees us from anxiety and allows us to live with contentment and joy. Finally, fulfillment comes from knowing that our lives are part of something much bigger than ourselves. When we put God first, we understand that we are part of His greater plan and that our lives have eternal significance. Every act of service, every moment of love, and every decision to honor God adds to the building of His kingdom. We are not simply living for our own happiness or success, but for a purpose that stretches far beyond our lifetime. This understanding brings a sense of fulfillment that surpasses any worldly achievement because we know that our lives matter in ways we cannot always see, but God does. We are participating in His redemptive work in the world, and that is the ultimate fulfillment. Ultimately, when we put God first, we find that fulfillment is not a destination, but a journey. It is a continuous process of growing closer to God, serving others, and living according to His will. The fulfillment we experience is not based on what we accomplish or what we accumulate, but on the depth of our relationship with God and the way we live out His purpose in our lives. And as we continue to put God first, we discover that the more we give ourselves to Him, the more He fills us with the peace, joy, and satisfaction that can only be found in Him.